Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, a widow and her son, Jack, lived in a cottage at the edge of a forest. They were very poor, and Jack, who was a bright lad, could have been more helpful to his mother, but because she expected little of him, little is what she got. They were so poor that all they had to live on was the milk from their faithful old cow, Bossy. But then the day came when Bossy could give no more milk.
"Now what?" cried the poor woman. "Without that milk, we shall surely starve."
"I guess the only thing left to do is for me to take Bossy to the market and see if I can sell her," said Jack. Jack's mother disagreed. She knew the boy had never bartered in the marketplace before, and she feared he'd be unable to get a good price. Jack knew, however, that they had no other choice, and soon she agreed to let him go.
"Just make sure you get a good price, Jack,"
she called after him as he led the cow towards town.
"She's all we have."
Jack hadn't traveled very far when he came upon a peddler resting by the roadside. The man asked the boy where he was bound with the old cow. When Jack explained he was off to the market to fetch the best price he could for her, the peddler smiled. He pulled a small bag from his pocket and said, "I have the best price right here, laddie. Beans, magic beans." "Beans for a cow?" Jack laughed. But as he turned to go, the peddler poured the beans from the bag into his other hand. They were large, polished smooth, and richly colored. "Magic beans," the peddler smiled and held them out to Jack. Something about those beans caught his eye and drew him closer, and he wanted them more than he had ever wanted any other thing in his whole life. Within moments, the trade was made, and Jack was walking away, clutching the bag of beans. "Be careful, Jack," the peddler called after him. "Remember, those aren't just any old beans. Those are magic beans." But the boy didn't hear him. He was already hurrying home, eager to show his mother the good bargain that he had made.
"You what?"
the poor woman sobbed, as Jack repeated once more that he had traded their cow for a handful of beans. "But they're magic," Jack said, offering them to her in his outstretched hand.
"Oh!"
she cried in disgust.
"Get those things away from me!"
As she slapped his hand away, the beans flew through the open window and out into the garden. Feeling foolish and ashamed, Jack went to bed that night without any supper. As usual, he was awakened early the next morning by his growling stomach. But this morning was different. His bedroom was unusually dark. Something big had grown up overnight outside his window and was now blocking the sunlight.
"It's the beans!"
Jack exclaimed, and he raced outside into the garden. There, he found a huge bean plant, as big around as a tree trunk, twisting up out of the flower bed. It grew like a winding ladder, higher than their cottage and higher than the treetops, up and up until it disappeared into the clouds. In a twinkling, Jack began climbing the giant beanstalk. Hand over hand he climbed, scrambling higher and higher into the sky. He climbed all that until, at last, he found himself in the clouds. He was tired, but pressed on, hoping to see what lay ahead. He emerged from the cloud bank to find that he had reached the beanstalk's end. All around him, as far as he could see, rocks and hills seemed to float in a sea of clouds. Far in the distance, a castle rose out of the mist. Suddenly, Jack's stomach grumbled to remind him of just how empty it was. Hoping he might beg a meal at the castle, he leapt to a nearby rock and struck out for the distant palace. When at last Jack came to the castle steps, he had to stretch on tiptoe to reach a huge rusty knocker that hung from the heavy door. He could barely lift it before letting it fall, and a loud clang followed that echoed through the halls within. Soon the door opened, and a very tall woman squinted down at him. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," she said. "But you're not from around here, are you?" Jack shook his head. "I didn't think so, because my husband is a horrible ogre who has eaten every human being for 50 miles, she said. "So you better scat if you know what's good for you." "If only I could, ma'am," Jack feebly replied. "But I'm so tired and hungry, I'm afraid I'm going to faint." And with that, the poor boy's knees buckled, and he began to sink onto the steps. "Oh, all right," she said, taking pity on him. "You can come in, but just long enough to eat a bowl of porridge. My husband is due home any time now, and if he catches you here, it will be the devil to pay for both of us." The ogre's wife led Jack down a winding stone corridor and into a large kitchen. A huge black cauldron full of porridge simmered over the fire. The woman told Jack to sit down on the hearth while she filled a bowl for him. This she gave him, along with a hunk of fresh bread and a cupful of milk. Food had never tasted so good, and Jack ate heartily, despite the strange surroundings. Just as he finished the last bite, thunderous sounds shook the castle walls. "That's my husband!" the woman gasped. "Quick! The cupboard!" she cried. And as Jack leapt into the cabinet, she closed the door behind him, then tossed his bowl, cup, and spoon into the soapy water in the dish tub. Luckily, the cupboard door didn't close completely, so Jack held his breath and peeked out. Maybe not," she said, sizing him up. "That other little beggar was smaller and scrawnier, I think." "I am no beggar, madame," said Jack, "but just a weary traveler who would appreciate a place to rest and perhaps a crust of bread." "Well," said the woman, taking pity on him, "maybe just a crust of bread." Opening the door wider, she let Jack in. "But beware! My husband is an ogre, and if he catches you here, you'll find yourself roasting over the kitchen fire. And mind, you'd better not steal from him like that last little thief." Jack nodded and followed her into the kitchen. All was as it had been before, except this time it was a hearty stew that simmered in the cauldron. The woman gave him a bowlful and then continued her dinner preparations. Once again, Jack had just finished his last bit of food when the thunderous arrival of the ogre was heard. This time, however, the woman pointed Jack to the oven, where he climbed inside and hid. No sooner had this been done than the ogre stormed into the room. As with the cupboard, this new hiding place gave Jack a great view. He could peek out through a gap in the oven door. "Fee-fi-fo-fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman!" roared the ogre. "There you go again," said his wife. "That's the third time this week you've smelled something. Well, I've just spent the whole day cleaning." She pointed to a mop and buckets in the corner. "So don't go blaming me. It's probably that cheese in the pantry." "Cheese, my eye," the ogre grumbled, as he threw himself into his chair and snorted. It's probably that cheese.
My eye.
The cottage came into view, he called out,
Mother! Quick! The axe!
As he leapt to the ground, she was there waiting, and with all the breath he had left in him, he swung the axe. Chop, chop, chop. He could see the ogre's legs coming down the stalk above him. Chop, chop. The beanstalk started to sway. Chop! With one last blow, the towering beanstalk cracked, gave a mighty groan, then fell, crashing into the forest. The earth shook as somewhere deep in the woods, the falling ogre met his doom. In time, the magic harp did change Jack's life, though not quite in the way he had imagined when he first saw it. They did indeed set out to tour the world, and Jack hoped the harp would make his fortune as people flocked to hear it play. But he and the harp made it only as far as the neighboring kingdom. A command performance for the king and his beautiful young daughter. The princess became enchanted by more than just the harp. Years later, after Jack and the princess were married, and Jack's mother was generously taken care of, he would sometimes pause at a palace window. And there, looking out across the rolling lands over which he and the princess ruled, he couldn't help but smile to himself as he remembered that all of this had started with a handful of beans. Magic beans.